I'm Simon Flagg, the CEO of Wathaurong Aboriginal Co-op, and welcome to Kitchen Table Podcast, where we talk about community, culture and voice. Stay tuned, follow us on our socials, and I hope you enjoy this podcast.
Kunyaba Miriol, Norareen. Neriak Judy, Neriak Simon, Neriak Wendy, Neriak Glenn. Kambani Wathaurong to play. Benodek, Naduk, Waring, Ba Kalkal Bill, Yanabule to play. Ba Benakulek, Karangabal, Wanga to play. Benakulek, Murab. Jaring to play, Merior, Mawan, Ba Merior, Ba Yaram, Kella Kalkal Bill, Ba Getawal Nal Nichi, Kitchajari, Kalkal Bill, Kambani, Getawal Ba Nal. Nabu Merior, Ba Wa Yiram No Koko Wathaurong. What I've just said in Wathaurong language is G'day, hello, how are you? My name's Judy, this is Simon, Wendy and Glenn. Here is Wathaurong country. Our grandfathers, grandmothers and families have walked this land. The creators made the land that it is. Their spirits wander the land today, long ago, now and the future. Speaking to families and other mobs quietly, let's talk family, come together and speak before today and tomorrow. Here is Wathaurong.
Thank you. It's always great to hear. It's really different listening to it like this. So
it is. Thank you, Aunty Judy. It's great to hear language and how language just impacts once again your soul and being and that connection to the connection to country.
And I find language gives you another grounding within culture. And as Glenn and I were discussing before, like Glenn's worked with one linguist, I've worked with different, but the language sounds are different from across Australia. You know, it's not one sound. I know when I was doing my NGs, Wathaurong starts with NGs, finishes with NGs, start with DJs, TJs and finish with them as well, and double O's, double R's and double E's in our language. Yeah, it's a lot of them things. But I had trouble with doing my NGs, really struggled until I went to the Pulama conference 3 years ago, and always remember I come across an elder from Central Australia and they had NGs in their language. And I said to her, I go, you got NGs, I having trouble. And she just pointed a finger at me and goes, girl, put your little finger on your tongue and go, and your tongue will drop there all the time. And I've never had a problem since. It's amazing. It's me. I love language. I just love it.
It's amazing, it's powerful, and it has given you voice.
Yep. And
which is what we're here for.
Yeah.
it is.
And, you know, and with what I write, you know, speak quietly. Our elders always spoke quietly. They never yelled, and nobody was ever better than anybody else. And another experience that I use is the gum tree. Every gum leaf smells different on the one gum tree. You pick your own. But if you didn't have all those individual gum leaves on that tree, what would that tree be? The same as within our community, on our board of directors. Everybody is different, and everybody has a right to be different and to be heard. And that is the blessing that I have as being part of Wathaurong Aboriginal Co-operative. Been there a long time, like a lot of the other people around this table. But being on the board to bring back community, I think that's the powerful thing we've done as a board. And, you know, even though I have a title of chairperson, I am no better than any other board member. I am one of our board. I am not a hierarchy. I'm not that leaf on the top of a gum tree. We're all together as individuals. I think I've said that right. I don't know. What do you think, Wendy and Glenn, who are always you're the directors too? We're one, different but one.
Well, I think the directors' voices are very important. I think, not just in the terms of following Western law of governance, but in the cultural leading and nurturing, like we do with Wathaurong language, nurturing and reclaiming that and bringing a stronger voice of culture, just not using English as a way of sharing knowledge.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that if you live on Wathaurong land, you're entitled to speak Wathaurong language, So my belief is I share my language with everybody, because if I don't have people to speak my language with me, I don't have a language. And, when we go back, my grandmother could speak it, like Wendy said before. She'd heard it. Glenn's heard it before in the past. So Simon, they weren't allowed to. So to be privileged that we can speak a language is such a blessing. It's a blessing.
Mm. Thank you for that, Aunt, because it is, and I think what you said is kind of highlights why we've wanted to create this podcast. And so, we have created the Wathaurong Kitchen Table podcast to really start practicing our culture, start practicing our oral history and passing that down. Too often we're at sorry business or other things saying we should have captured their stories, or we should have captured the stories of the place. And when this organisation turned 40, Uncle Glenn led a project in that space, and it kind of just ignited a passion in me that we should be doing that all the time, not just for special events. So really that's what this podcast is about, is giving us a platform where we can talk about all things from culture to community to key activities or events such as The Voice and whatnot that are happening. But before we, I guess, get into The Voice stuff, I really am enjoying talking about this organisation and its history, and you've all been part of it on different parts. I'd really be keen to know your views and journey on it, because I obviously have a very different one, a young one running around, and for me this organisation was a safe space to be a young Aboriginal kid surrounded by so many elders and aunties and uncles that all helped raise me and all us other kids running around at that time. I honestly don't know what we would have done if we didn't have this organisation. So from a young one, it was like this was home. But what was it like to yourselves in helping create it?
Yeah, I've been on the board for lots of years, on and off, and part of it is I was a chairperson again when I had my young Simon. So as a mother, I had a baby that I was mothering, and I'd be chairing community meetings, and the best part of it, my community that I was part of, was looking after my son. They only brought him back to me when he needed to be fed, and he was nicknamed by this community, and now when I introduce him as Simon, people don't know him because his name's Scoot, because he used to scoot around the building. So I was part of the Forster Street building that we got first, and then when we built this building, I was on the board again, and I'm walking around on the site, and I was dressed appropriately, high heels and all that, walking on a building site. And I had this guy come up to me and goes, "You shouldn't be on the site like this." If anybody knows me, I told him to take 2 runs. My father was a brickie, and I'd been on building sites since I could crawl. But the amount of people that come in through that, our organisation was first built to help people connect, because Geelong was part of a lot of disconnection. Glenn can talk more about his journey of the connection within the cooperative, but we made it a safe space for anybody that was Aboriginal. And then part of our term of thing, I always remember we started the Institute of Career Education out at Deakin. And that was a first, that was something we'd done for other communities. And then we built this building. At some stage we moved a little bit away from community vision. Now the board now is back to community vision, and that is very strong. I know for myself that is the best part. I can bring my grandchildren in here and I introduce them to people, and they know the people that I introduce them to as aunt and uncle. If they can't find Nan, find aunt and uncle. They'll keep them safe till Nan pops up again, because Nan's always running around this building, I think. And with Simon, I used to look after him in school. So I work education. Okay, somebody else now.
For me, it's about the people, and when, and I'm talking, early 80s in regards to playing football, recruited by Geelong Football Club. I'd live in the football house. My associate team would be the East Belmont Football Club, so I'd play there when I didn't play down at Geelong.
What position you
Trevor, everywhere. Trevor Edwards was the coach. Trevor, in regards to the early days when we're living in Pavo Street, Belmont. Prior to that, being recruited, Trevor came around to have a chat, and that's where he met my sister Merrin. And so I remember going to Shannon Avenue. It was 135 Shannon Avenue, in regards to where they would meet and have meetings around the table and discuss discuss issues, discuss Aboriginal issues. So I remember, Trevor and Quentin and Adrian Jackson,
Joyce Smith.
Robbie Bundle, Joyce Smith, Vicky Cousins, Leo Muir, Ivan Cousins, all these really proud Aboriginal people from different language groups, or some from the same language group, who were related, and talking about how they could kind of have a place where it could represent them, and could represent a voice for them in regards to some of the issues that were impacting on me as a member of the stolen generation, etc. So, which was at the time, being 14, 15, you don't really kind of realise the impact of the outcome of those very early discussions. I mean, I remember the impact of, if I pulled a hamstring in footy, then Leo Muir would sort out the hamstring for me by his back of his, he'd strap me in the back of his heel, going and knotting out the knots of the hamstring, and I'll be back playing a week later. But just kind of now, when I reflect back on it, the importance of the seeds that they were planting back then, over 43 years ago, in regards to, and obviously they wouldn't have been really aware of what would have come about 43 years later, and the for starting from nothing to an organisation that supports thousands and thousands of Aboriginal people within the boundaries of the Wathaurong traditional language group. So and the the development of the different spaces, from being in the houses and then being in the tin shed and then being in the politician's place and then being in Foster Street and coming to Morgan Street, and now with the vision of our CEO who's from community and the board in regards to the new 3-story building that we're going to have. I mean, that's really so significant in the context of our identity, place and belonging here now.
Aunty, Wendy, what was it like for you?
The co-op has always been, since I arrived in Geelong, connected to my connections to family, because one of the first teaching appointments I got was down in Warrnambool. So I've been connected to Gunditjmara people for a long time. Then I came to work here in 1988 and got called up by Brother Trevor and Lynn McGuinness to get interested in the board as I was working out at Deakin University. So I've been on and off in watching this organisation grow. But before I came here, I worked in the Aboriginal early childhood area, where I went around for a couple of years looking at early childhood programs. So I got to know this community through its early childhood program and saw the co-op growing. I see this place, like every place that I've seen around the state and around the nation, as important meeting places and very strong political places in order for the fight of our human rights. I love this place like it's a home, really, and it's sort of doing a journey with you in your life and growing you, really, and just sharing knowledge. So I'm proud of, where we're going. I hope that Aboriginal organisations will continue into the future, when we talk about the voice. I hope they're never ever controlled by governments where they just become departments, but they never ever get away from the real issue of our gathering place, of our sacred place, of being together. So, yeah, it's funny when you talk about
It is.
the Wathaurong Co-op and what it actually means. Well, it means so many things to so many different people that have journeyed through the doors.
And like any home, we have our ups and downs. But we keep coming together for the for the importance of its connection to community and community's voice.
It's probably one of the strengths, I think, of the Aboriginal model, the ACO model. And I think one of the key things for Wathaurong is it taught me, having grown up from a strong family and coming from a strong community up in Swan Hill area, like there is a real strong identity and connection and a big mob up there that we all know each other and our families. But down in Geelong, obviously we didn't have that same connection as a whole community. We're a lot of different communities from all over the country, traditional owners from all parts of this great land. But it showed me that what was the most important thing is just being around Aboriginal people, and not if they were just, if they were other Wamba people or whatnot. No, just being around other Aboriginal people and learning about all of our different histories and aspects and the importance of just embracing that. So there's one saying we say at the moment, many mobs, one community, and that's exactly what Wathaurong taught me, is doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter where your mob's from. If you come here and you be part of this community, you become part of a family. And that's really what I see the co-op. We're the home. You come in and out when you need us, but we're always here for you. And man, we had some great times in the 80s and 90s growing that family and just getting bigger and bigger to – I never thought as a young kid running around this organisation that we'd be where we are today. And like you said, we have had our ups and downs, but I think any time we go off track, the key focus that always brings us back in the right direction is focusing back on community. And I think the board should be commended on that because it's the sole reason we're here, aren't we? We were created by a community to be here for community. And as long as we always keep that as our vision, I think we're always going to create a great organisation that is a safe space for our community. And ultimately, I think you knocked it on the head, Aunty Wendy, they're home. Because obviously this isn't our country, but when I'm in this organisation, I feel home.
That's exactly right. I feel home as well. I mean, we have to go home on country, do our spiritual business, do our family obligations as well, but it's the same here, We've got obligations, cultural obligations here, and to grow younger generations like we've been growing up.
Yeah.
And our accountability to community. As board members, we're accountable to community. Community have voted us in, and so therefore that responsibility and decision making on behalf of community, the sense of belonging, that the spiritual connections of our children who have been born on country here, and those custodial responsibilities that they are connected to. They may not understand at the moment, but that they're connected to, and the responsibilities that they're connected to, and the custodial responsibilities that we've had here, and the many senior people, old people who've been here, and have planted those seeds of cultural responsibilities in regards to making sure that the traditional owners here have never been forgotten about. And from the impact of 1835 onwards. So very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been a good example of how a lot of us who have chosen to come here to live here wasn't stolen or put in a children's home. I mean, we come here, but, I totally believe that this community has been a very generous community to many, many people that have arrived on this land. And, I think it's so important that we carry on traditions as well and be respectful to all the traditional owners, not defined by government, but defined by our cultural ways of recognising who traditional owners are. Because that was the continuity of our culture. You would be very respectful when you went onto someone else's land to live. Go in slowly until the community invited you to sit at the table. And the same thing applies today. And there are so many things that we've brought through from Aboriginal law to now, and it's not recognised as being strong in us, and we're always having to justify who we are and what we are. And that's why when you walk through the door, you feel like you don't have to do that in the co-op.
Yeah, I love that. You just walk in on, I feel home.
Which is a part of our health and well-being, which is so significant within our lives, considering how much impact we take on board outside these doors in the society that we live in. So to be able to come into our space, our place of belonging, and feel safe and secure, and is an important part of our health and well-being and our cultural health and well-being.
Well, I love a lot of just the discussions that happen when community come in here. The laughs we have, the jokes, like humour is a big part of our culture. We like to tell stories and joke around with each other, and it just helps if you're having a crap day or whatever to have those yarns and just be in the moment. You walk away and you've forgotten about why you were shit. And I always feel uplifted. Like I leave work tired, but at the same time, I can't wait to come back the next day.
Which is really interesting because, you know, in the old days and community coming together, you know, and coming together to discuss issues where you'd have those debates and disagreements and, you know, kind of they agree with them and they don't agree with them, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you know, everybody comes back together and, you know, can sit around the table and have a cuppa and a yarn and, you know, continue on, which is a really important part of the process to where we are today.
Yeah. It does lead me to then, you know, Aunty Wendy talked about it around one of the key roles of this organisation was to be an advocate and have a political arm and really say what our community needed, and whether that's to government, whether that's to the wider community, it's always been a role of this co-op is to advocate. And then obviously in 2023 we're talking about the voice to the referendum. And obviously it's going to be held later in October this year. And as an organisation we came out, as we have done on a number of different issues, and gave an advocacy on what we think will help continue to progress the Aboriginal affairs further forward for our community and for ourselves. How are you feeling about the voice? And I know you, Aunty Wendy, you were in this space. It took a lot for you to really get your head around it and supporting it. What's the voice mean to you?
I think the voice just sees, you know, it's on the horizon. It's just another stepping stone that we need to step on in order to balance out the ledger in relation to where our people are placed in society. It's about our human rights, really. And it's not a big ask. Number one, be recognised in the Constitution, the founding Constitution of the country. And that took a long time for communities to come to some form of consensus. You know, from 2011, then 25, and then 2017, the report came out and was presented to the Liberal government. And it's taken us a long time because there are a lot of people in our community that talk about treaty, and they talk about truth-telling as well. And so our community struggled in the first couple of months talking about it as a group, and we cleared the space where they could make up their own mind before we went and worked with other people across the region. And, you know, I've come a long way with the voice. I mean, I don't vote. I've never voted in an election. But I've decided, after watching Treaty B implemented in Victoria and legislation being changed, and other states and territories like South Australia, Northern Territory and Queensland, I watched the state government and how they negotiated with local communities, traditional owners, and I thought when, you know, the recognised campaign came out and the referendum, I thought, I think it's really time for me to make a commitment. So I've decided to enrol and vote on the referendum because I believe that we need guiding principles at the federal level and make the politicians more accountable. The voice is about nothing different than 160 odd organisations, corporates, mining companies, the whole lot. They talk to executive. So it's no different than that. And we should have a say on any legislation that impacts on us, not only as people, but impacts on our culture. So I'm a strong advocate of the voice, and I know that there are many views in our community, but we come to a consensus that the board needed to make a decision, and the board did make a decision in support of it. So, you know, I think it's a time in history where people need to just sit down, think what the future can be for all Australians, not just Aboriginal people, but all Australians. We've got to get rid of the hurt, the intergenerational hurt that's passed from one generation to another since our country was taken over, and it was invaded. And we need to reconcile on that. Not to reconcile and be assimilated, but to reconcile and walk as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this country alongside other Australians. And then maybe I personally will feel more Australian because I don't. So that's my inner feelings, and, you know, there's still much to learn about it.
And what's your you touched on a little there, but what's your hopes in where this could lead us and the actual key changes or opportunities it's going to create in your mind?
I honestly believe that it will change Australia for the recognition and also the next steps we need to work in addressing the human rights of all of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations around the country. There are human rights issues that need to be stopped. Cultural genocide needs to be stopped in this country. It's not just teaching Aboriginal people or non-Aboriginal people about ab study. You're talking about our identity and our cultural expression. And for people to embrace our culture in a way that's not about pouring your heart, you know, on the table, but accepting that we are very cultured, old people with a lot of knowledge to still grow and contribute to Australia.
Very powerful.
Very powerful. For 233 years, decisions have been made about the outcome of who we are as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, with the decision makers and the policies and procedures that they have created over time that has affected the outcome of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people has created, for me, a generational process. And that generational process connects to the assimilation process that has gone on and the continuation of the whitewashing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Australia. And that if we don't plant a seed and put it on the table to be able to have a voice to the federal executive and to be able to discuss and debate with the executive in regards to the policies and procedures that they are creating about us, then we are going to be totally whitewashed through the assimilation policy from the 1960s. The referendum and the choice that not I can create an effective change with, but the 97% of the Australian people who can create an effective change in regards to planting a seed for us to have that voice. To have that voice is not about money. It's not about land. It is not about all the things that are being said. It is about having representatives elected by communities across Australia, and those representatives coming together to then being able to make the system accountable for the decisions that they are wanting to make about us from a federal government perspective. Yeah. So it's really important for me as a member of the Stolen Generation to have representatives there who can represent my voice, because my voice has been put to the side and disconnected from over a long period of time, and that process is connected to, the generations of my family and not being a part of the 1901 Federation of Australia and being excluded, and then the 67 referendum then allowing us to be counted in the census, which then was about the federal government taking over role and responsibility from the states and territories in regards to making decisions for us. But hopefully in 2023 that the Australian people will provide us the right as human beings to be in the Constitution as human beings and as Australians.
Yeah. That's really the fundamental, isn't it? It gives us that connection to walk with other people and be recognised, and that our ancestors before us are finally acknowledged and represented. If I look at it from a organisation point of view, I look at it and think it will really help to elevate our voice and guidance to government around what can make real change. Like you said, for the 200 plus years, the direction and narrative and what is going to work for us is not being developed by us or consulted with us. It's being developed for us. And we've seen the impacts of that, and we still see the impacts of that, from stolen generations to the health gap to social and economical issues. The list goes on. So for us to have a voice now in our current context, it requires so many of the hurdles that we have to go through when we're talking to government. It needs all those hurdles to work for even our voice to get up to the top. By the time it's up the advice is up at the decision makers, a lot of our voice is being knocked out or reimagined or reinterpreted. But by having a voice at the top, nobody can influence that anymore, and we can give direct feedback. Well, what works for us, instead of having to argue when they're funding us. I've got this great program and we think it will help your community, and then they tell you and you're like, that's not going to help us. If we were doing it, we'd do it a different way. So giving us that voice to make real impact and help further enhance not only our community and our culture, but you hit it on the head, Aunt, to help this country as a whole continue to grow and make strides forward. It can only happen if we're acknowledged and we walk together. Otherwise, we keep hiding part of our history.
And we remain invisible.
Yeah.
And what we want is visibility at the very top level of legislation. and policy. And that's not a big ask. I mean, the Statement of the Heart is such a generous offer from our people to the Australian community. That's what I believe. It's not angry. It's not anything. And 97% will vote on that.
So what the Australian people are actually voting for is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. And that, you know, simply do you approve this proposed alteration? And so if the Australian people say yes, then there's an alteration to the Constitution, which is Chapter IX, the recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, 129, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. So in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, one, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Two, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representation matters to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And three, the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. So it's really simple in regards to what seeds are trying to be planted here in regards to positive outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and that they, you know, and that the executive government have all the power and still all the decision making and outcomes if they want to make it. I mean, yeah, we just have a representation of people who make them accountable on the policies and procedures and the decisions that they're making about us.
And can also present what we think will work for our community for them to think about. Because we touched on it, this organisation and all these organisations are a perfect example of what Aboriginal people can do if you enable us to have a voice and work in the space that can really help our mob. Like, we've got a great organisation. Imagine if we could do that with the national level.
This organisation is 43 years old. We're aware of that. But we're also aware that we are a part of a race of people who are a part of the oldest living culture in the world, which is over 60,000 years plus and probably longer. If we didn't have the capabilities of being strategic thinkers and decision makers for all those thousands of years, we wouldn't have survived beyond a day, a week, a month, a year. So, you know, to have the capabilities to exist within the impact of an empire who came here and has invaded us, suppressed us, and not wanting us to exist. I mean, to be here, to be able to put this on the table and say, all we're asking for is a voice at the federal level to go, hey, this is how you decision makers can create better outcomes for us from the issues that you have impacted us with. And we have the capabilities within each of our communities across the traditional language groups of Australia to create better health and wellbeing outcomes, better outcomes in education, better outcomes in justice, better outcomes in health, better outcomes across the board. It's the simplicity of it is quite extraordinary, I think.
And do you think it's, from your lens, Lynn's Aunty Wendy, you touched on this about how gracious the Statement of the Heart is, considering the impacts that we've had as a community, on our culture, our language, our families, of this history of this country and the impacts it's had. But as Aboriginal people, we continue to put our hand out and ask to walk together. We had many men and women fight for this country when they weren't counted. And even today, the Uluru Statement puts the hand out, even with all those impacts, and ask to walk together. What does that mean to you?
Well, I was 12, I think. Sorry. I was 12, I think, when the 1967 referendum happened. So, and when I was of voting age, I told my mum I was never going to vote until we were treated equally in this country. At 18, I made my mind up. People think that we don't vote because they think we're illiterate, or they think we're too lazy to go to a voting booth. But there's a whole lot of us across this country who just have not totally given over to a system that continually pulls you in like a vacuum to be different than you are spiritually. Mm-hmm. So I think, I expected there was going to be the racial bubble would burst, and it has. And that makes me feel okay, because it means that the racism isn't our problem. It's the whole of Australia's problem. And we need to fix it up instead of just bubbling down the bottom. So it sort of validates you as an Aboriginal person, or as a Wamba Weta guy, a Nyeri person. It validates the racism you've experienced. And it gives you some peace, because you know what you're fighting. It's not hidden, and it's out there. So how do we turn it around as all Australians and say enough is enough as human beings?
Yeah.
So, it is ugly. And I get hurt that it takes 97% of the population to say yay or nay. But if that's what it takes to stop the generational fighting for our existence and our culture and our future, then it's a good fight.
Yeah, I definitely see it like that. It's hard. I haven't experienced this racism since the 90s coming out, but if I look and think this is the fight that I've got to have that will help progress this, and I look at what my ancestors went through, then we just got to pick it up and take the charge and be those leaders for this generation to help the next generation take those steps. And I just imagine what it was like for our ancestors leading the 67 referendum, and the challenges they would have faced, and the racism they would have copped.
Every generation has had to struggle. We've got to stop struggling. There are times when we've said in the community, we're not surviving anymore, we're celebrating. Well, we're still surviving.
Yeah. All right. So we might...
You three have been doing really well. I'm going, yes. But people need to realise we discussed this as a board level, and on behalf of the co-op, and we didn't discuss it lightly either. Simon, you were in there when the board was discussing it, and the decision wasn't made in one board meeting. It took us a few, and we looked at all the pros and cons, because I know as a board, when we said we support the yes vote for the community, like Wathaurong supports it, we then told the community we weren't forcing them to say yes. It was just the board was supporting the yes vote. You know, so we had to be very careful of how we worded it afterwards so that our community didn't say to us, you're telling us how to vote. You know, and we're advising people do their own research out there. And we advise it every day. And as far as the racism nowadays, I know my husband's copped a fair bit of it lately. When we go out, people tackle him on his Aboriginality. And, you know, he hasn't had that for a few years now. And for him to relive it, it re-triggers his him in every way, because he grew up in a country town with major racism, you know, so I've seen that part of what's happened to him as well. So if it happens to him, it's happening to our other community members that are not telling us they're hurting either.
I think that's probably been one of the biggest, I say, successes of how we've approached The Voice, is that we aren't sitting here saying you got to vote one way or the other. We're here saying know all the information and make your own decision. But as an organisation, we did decide to support The Voice because we think it's a step in helping progress for our community. And as an organisation, that's exactly what we're here for, is always progressing and making a better future for our mob. What more can we ask for? So I think on that note, we might have a break and we'll bring Geordie in to talk about treaty. But I also do want to have some laughs on this and have some reminiscing about some of the good old days in this organisation and how it was created, because that's our humour.
That's scary. That's the disco days, Simon. You
Excuse
know
me,
that.
Sporting carnivals, best netballers in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how we used to always come together, and yes, how I used to drive the bus to pick people up for the ball. It was all right getting them to the ball, getting them home. Well, that was different.
Westwick Eels, footy.
But I'm going to say Nutney, which is thanks. And I always say Gubata, take care. I never say goodbye, because to me, goodbye's final. And this is not final. And this is the beginning. So it's Gubata. Take care for the next one.